So thanks everyone for joining us today for the Science-Based Targets for Nature case study report that was a part of the CMP Collaborative Learning Initiatives this past year. And I just wanted to let everyone know a few ground rules / information about how this will work today. So we'll have two different presentations, one from someone from the actual Science-Based Targets Network, and then also from our consultant who worked on the initiative this past year. So there'll be times for two questions or two periods for questions off of each presentation. If you have any questions during the presentations, please put them in the chat and I will be sure to read them out at the end of each presentation. And then I'll also open it up at the end for you to raise your hand and ask any questions verbally that you'd like to as well. But we won't be answering questions until the end of each presentation. And with that, I will let Charles introduce the initiative.
Thank you, Sarah. So yes, my name is Charles. I'm, like Sarah mentioned, I am a consultant working on a number of projects with the Conservation Measures Partnership. And I'm located in Montreal. Sarah, I'm not sure if you want to introduce yourself now or.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Bowsmith. I work for corporate engagement for the Science-Based Targets Network, or SBTN.
Great. So yes, welcome everyone. Really excited to be here with you today to have this finally have this presentation. So the ultimate vision for this project is to see if the SBTN and the CMP can build off and align with each other so that we send a single unified message to organizations that we work with. As you'll see in the presentation, there are many organizations that are both part of this SBTN and the CMP, and methods and tools that we are developing serve a very similar purpose, although for very different target audiences. So the SBTN is focused on corporations and later on municipal governments, and the CMP is focused on NGOs and government organizations. So as Sarah mentioned, this project received funding from the CMP in 2021. So during the first year of this project, we focused on creating awareness between the SBTN and the CMP. So the SBTN statement and partner agreement was submitted for consideration to the CMP board, and they're looking at it currently. And we displayed how potentially we could pilot the SBTN guidelines using the conservation standards and Miradi. And Miradi is now, or the conservation standards are now mentioned in one of the SBTN's technical annexes. So the agenda for today, so the objective is to introduce the SBTN to you guys and get input on opportunities and strategies to promote CMP's work and support the SBTN. So think about this question throughout the presentations, because we'll be asking for your input at the end of the presentation. So we'll start with Sarah, who's going to introduce the SBTN. We'll have a quick question period. And then I'll quickly explain how we could pilot the SBTN using the conservation standards and Miradi share. And then we'll be exploring some collaboration opportunities between our two groups, and again, questions. All right, so we will have a quick video just to introduce what the SBTN is about. Sarah, can you confirm that you hear the sound?
Yes, we hear the sound.
We're in the midst of twin crises, climate change and nature loss. And to secure a healthy, resilient and equitable world, we need to address both together. Not just because nature is climate's greatest ally, absorbing half our carbon emissions a year, but also because nature is the foundation of our economy and our lives.
How do you feed 10 million people in a way that protects our planet?
How can we help create a global economy in which companies operate within the Earth's limits? The Science-Based Targets Network has set out to develop science-based targets for nature, guidelines and tools to help businesses understand the complex impacts and dependencies that they have on nature, set targets to limit that impact, and help them contribute to a nature-positive future.
We are collaborating and collectively developing a set of solutions so that that becomes a standard of practice. So companies have a dependable place to go to. They know what the best science of the world is saying. So the best science then drives a practical set of solutions that companies can embrace.
To ensure science-based targets for nature are as practical, user-friendly and cost-efficient as possible, nearly 100 companies with a combined market cap of $4 trillion collaborate with us, road testing our methods, tools and guidance.
We're working on our nature strategy, and we found out about science-based target network. It was absolutely key that we get involved with them. So I truly believe that SBTN initiative is very important. It's very important to bring rigor and science to nature.
We are calling for an agreement on nature, similar to the Paris Agreement on climate change, to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030. Science-based targets for nature will play a key role in making this a reality.
While we test and finalize methods and tools for science-based targets for nature with business, science, and civil society partners, there's so much companies can be doing today to set them on the right pathways towards science-based targets for nature.
We recommend they assess their impacts and dependencies on nature throughout their value chain. They can set interim targets on key issue areas like land use and fresh water, which will count towards science-based targets for nature. And if they haven't already, they can set science-based targets for climate.
And they can lead the way by joining our corporate engagement program.
All right, great promotional video. So now that we have been introduced to the SBTN, I'd like to get an idea of your level of comfort or your level of knowledge on the SBTN. So I just shared in the chat a link to a survey. And can you confirm that, yes, this is working? So can you just let us know what is your current level of knowledge of either the Science-Based Target Initiative or the Science-Based Target Network? So we'll just take a couple of minutes, right? 1 minute. And then Sarah, you can start your presentation. All right, so it seems like most people have heard of it, at least, and some people are comfortable with the subject. Okay, so we'll leave that running, and Sarah, I'll switch to your presentation, and you can start.
Okay, thank you, Charles. So, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today and to talk about science-based targets for nature. As I mentioned, my name is Sarah Bausmith, and I work for the corporate engagement team for the Science-Based Targets Network, or SBTN for short. Next slide. So first, I want to explain the goal of SBTN. What can your company do today to start aligning with science to ensure that it's doing its part to contribute to an equitable, net zero, nature positive future? This is the question that SBTN endeavors to answer with our final methods, tools, and guidance. Next slide. Science-based targets for nature will tell you if your company is doing enough of the right actions in the right places to stay within an environmentally safe and socially just operating space. Next. So as mentioned in the video that Charles just showed, the business case for integrated action across climate and nature has never been clearer. We can't solve the climate crisis without addressing nature, and we can't solve the nature crisis without first addressing climate as well. These two issues are fundamentally interconnected, and our work builds on the Science-Based Targets Initiative, or SBTi, and extends into nature. Next slide. And by nature, we mean freshwater, land, oceans, and biodiversity. We're developing methods that will address our impacts on nature and climate holistically, so the targets set will create co-benefits rather than trade-offs. Next. And it's important to reiterate that these methods will address both an environmentally safe and socially just operating space for individual actors, and these will be aligned not only with the SDGs, but with other global goals, such as those put forth by the Convention on Biological Diversity. Next slide. So let me take a step back and explain more about who SBTN is. We're really a coalition of more than 55 NGO partners, including those behind SBTi, as well as many other organizations that work in the nature space, like IUCN and UNEP WCMC. Having such a wide network has a couple of benefits. It ensures that what we're doing builds off of and aligns with what these organizations are already working on. And it also sends a unified message to stakeholders like investors and governments that science-based targets are the direction that we need to go. Next slide. We also work with a number of companies and consultants to test our methods and tools. So the companies and consultants on this slide have already joined the SBTN Corporate Engagement Program, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a couple of slides, because they recognize the importance of taking action towards setting science-based targets for nature today. And they see the benefit of working with us to co-create and test our draft methods, tools, and guidance. Next slide. We also work with a number of industry coalitions and investors through our program. On the investor front, we're working with the UN Environment Program Finance Initiative, Principles for Responsible Investment, the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, or TNFD, and a number of other financial institutions to ensure alignment of our methods with their reporting and disclosure platforms. I also wanted to mention that SBTN is now an official core knowledge partner of TNFD, which means we'll be feeding directly into their work. Next slide. So what are the business benefits of setting SBTs for nature? In a survey conducted of companies who had set SBTs for climate, they noted that these targets had helped attract more investment, enhanced their competitive advantage, increased brand equity, created more resilient supply chains, and helped to attract and retain the best talent. Companies that set SBTs for nature can expect to see these benefits and more, as widespread protection and restoration of nature creates compounding resiliency and opportunities for all. Next slide. So where are we at now in our methods? Back in September 2020, we published our initial guidance for business that lays out the framework for setting science-based targets for nature. We've spent the last year continuing to expand on and clarify this initial guidance with our member companies, NGO partners, and technical experts. So SBTN will have some form of science-based target setting methods complete by the end of this year, but companies don't have to wait to get started. You can follow this initial guidance to begin to understand your impacts on nature. And we now have this interactive executive summary of the guidance, which can help you get started. Next slide. The framework behind the targets is based on the IPBES 2019 global assessment. So the targets will address a combination of pressures like land conversion and water pollution, as well as nature states like species abundance. For biodiversity specifically, we're looking at species, ecosystems, and nature's contributions to people. Next slide. So the initial guidance presents this high-level framework for companies to assess, prioritize, measure, address, and track their impacts on nature in line with science. In step 1, companies assess their materiality and map their value chain. In step 2, a company will identify spheres of influence and prioritize locations for action. Step 3 is where the rubber really meets the road and actual target setting comes in. So in this step, companies will measure their baseline, set targets, and develop a monitoring plan. Step 4 is the action step, which is very important, and I'll go over it in a little more detail in the next slide. And then finally, step 5 is when companies track their progress by monitoring, reporting, and verifying their targets. So here I'd just like to highlight step 4 of our guidance, since our main goal with SBTs for Nature is to drive the right amount of action in the right places. So we use the mitigation hierarchy of ARRRT, which you might already be familiar with. So first, it's avoiding negative impacts, then reducing negative impacts. And doing these two things first is very important. Sometimes businesses want to skip over the first two and then go right into restoring and regenerating. But it really is crucial to first avoid and reduce impacts wherever possible. Next is regenerating and restoring. And then the final point of our action framework is transforming, which means contributing to system-wide change and the drivers of nature loss. So what can companies do right now? One thing you can do is to get started on step 1, which is the value chain and materiality assessment. And as I mentioned previously, we already have guidance and tools available for this step, and it's a step that all companies will have to complete in order to set science-based targets for nature. But another action that you can take right now is to set interim targets. And our technical team has issued interim targets on these 5 topics: deforestation, water quality, water withdrawals, GHG emissions, and ecosystem regeneration, where there is enough scientific consensus on the right level of ambition needed. By setting these interim targets today, you're taking no regrets actions towards setting SBTs for nature. And although the SBTN methods won't be available until the end of 2022, interim targets like this one here provide you with a sense of the direction we're going, and also steps that you can take today that will be in line with the methods when they become available. So I'm not going to run through this whole slide in detail, and this is just one of our interim targets that we have available right now. But the key points are that we have the action type all the way on the left. This is an avoid action, and then the target itself under interim targets. And then we have further guidance for companies to help them set the target. And then all the way on the right, you have example indicators of what might be measured. And another action that companies can take right now that is really critical to our technical development is to join the SBTN corporate engagement program. So in this program, we work with companies to test drafts of our tools, methods, and guidance in order to ensure that what we're creating is user-friendly and cost-effective for businesses. We still have a lot to test over the next year or so, so we highly encourage any companies to join. And through this program, we provide opportunities for members to share how they are approaching our methods and guidance with the rest of the program members so that we can all learn from each other. And just to provide some basic information about the program, it's actually open to companies, consultancies, industry coalitions, and financial institutions. And it will run from now until when we finalize our methods. And then once we finalize our methods, we will transition from design phase to implementation phase, where a company can set and validate real targets with us. And I think I ran through that a little fast, but thank you so much for your time and attention today. And thank you to Charles and CMP for hosting this webinar. So if anything I've said has piqued your interest, or if you're interested in joining the corporate engagement program yourself, please feel free to email us or visit us on our website. And since I went a little fast, I assume we'll have a little extra time for questions. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have right now. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. So a question in the chat. So this is a great overview. how does SBTN align with or encapsulate existing company commitments or certifications like MSC or Rainforest Alliance?
Right now, that's something that our technical team is working to address. Certification is a whole big question. There's so many types of certification and so many levels of ambition in terms of certification. So right now our technical team is working through like which types of certification would be accepted, how they would be incorporated into the targets, how they might be incorporated into our guidance, which may not be accepted if they don't meet the right level of ambition. So it's still an open question, and it's something definitely that we will have to address because certification is so popular already. There are so many certification standards out there already. So good question.
Do we have any other questions? You can either put them in their chat or if you want to raise your hand. Oh, another one. Okay, what was your engagement strategy for corporations?
Well, we definitely have been engaged globally. We are lucky to have so many wonderful partners around the world already, so many NGO partners that already have a very wide breadth of corporate partners or companies that they've been working with already, as well as consultancies and technical experts. So we've leaned heavily on our partner network. We also have focused on, as we began to build up in our design phase, we started in early 2020 or late 2019. So we've been building since then. And we've also recently really been focusing on regional gaps and sectoral gaps. So once we started to develop a greater pool of companies that were interested in us and working with us, we began to identify gaps. We are really looking for a representative group of companies to be able to give us feedback on our methods and tools and guidance, because ideally, we would want all companies to be able to work with us and to be able to use our guidance to set science-based targets for nature. And so it's really critical during our design phase right now, while we're testing all of these things out, that lots of different types of companies from across different sectors, from across different regions are able to test these tools and guidance with us. So it's been a work in progress, and I think just seeing where we have gaps and trying to target towards those gaps as well to get a representative group of companies working with us.
Great, and we got time for one more question, which is related to certifications. What about crediting programs?
I have to be honest that I am more focused on the corporate engagement side of SBTN, so not quite a technical expert, but I will take your question back to our technical team. I think this is probably still something that is not answered yet and that they're still thinking about. But yeah, I'm sorry that I can't give you an answer right now.
No worries. Thanks very much, Sarah. And if you have any other questions regarding Sarah's presentation, you can also put them in the chat now. And if there's time at the end of Charles's, we can address them, but I will let Charles begin his presentation.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Sarah. So now I will be showing you how the conservation standards community and Miradi Share could potentially support the SBTN. But first, let's just clarify language so that we're all on the same page. So what is meant by targets in the SBTN world is slightly different than what is meant by targets in the conservation standards world. So in the SBTN, targets are defined as measurable, actionable, and time-bound objectives. Okay, so in the conservation standards world, the equivalent term would be either objectives or goals. And what is meant by science-based is that targets align with the Earth's limit and social sustainability goals like the SDGs. So in the conservation standards, the equivalent term would probably be evidence-based, but they're very similar. Okay, so if we look, Sarah presented the conceptual framework behind the SBTN. So if we look at both the SBTNs and the conservation standards frameworks, we realize that they're quite close in terms of conceptually. The SBTN's guidelines are based on the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES, in their 2019 global assessment. So targets are meant to address a combination of pressures or threats in the conservation standards language and nature states, specifically looking at species, ecosystems, and nature's contributions to people. So if we look at how this could crosswalk with the conservation standards, so the different realms, land, freshwater, ocean, are equivalent to different target types in the conservation standards. And then the pressures are equivalent to threats in our language. The drivers are equivalent to contributing factors. And then the state of nature is, would be equivalent to the viability analysis for targets. And then nature's contribution to people are somewhat equivalent to human well-being targets. And dependencies, which is a term that is used in the SBTN's world, are equivalent to ecosystem services in our language. So you can see that although we use different terms, conceptually, our frameworks are quite close to each other. Sarah presented the process, the SBTN process. So if we look at their process, we can also see there's a lot of similarities, but there are also some major differences, given that their target audience is companies. So the language are closer to the language that companies would adopt for their business processes. But in essence, the process is quite similar again. So if we look at equivalencies, the assess is very similar to the assess stage, and the materiality assessment is quite similar to the conservation standards threat evaluation process. And we'll have a closer look at this step later in the presentation. Then interpret and prioritize, where you prioritize places, where you develop your monitoring plan, you set your goals or your objectives. Is very close to the planning step of the conservation standards. And the step to measure, or the sub-step to measure baseline, is the equivalent of in the conservation standards, where you decide on the current status of your of the viability status of your targets. So there's not a one-to-one equivalent, but in general, they follow the same or a similar process. And then implementation happens at the act and the tract phase. And then finally, analyze and adapt is where in the SBTN, they talk about verification. So the SBTN indicated that the last steps, so measure, set, disclose, act, and track, are not well supported by current tools, given that the focus and the strength of the conservation standards and Miradi is to support results-based adaptive management, or in other words, to measure and track your actions and the results and impact they are generating. It seems like there's an opportunity for CMP to support the SBTN. Okay, so step one of the SBTN guidance uses a tool called the Materiality Matrix. That's the matrix you see on the screen now. It's developed using a sectoral materiality tool. So again, different language, but it's very close to what we're used to do with the threat assessment step. So in that step, the companies are expected to screen what activities are potentially relevant to their sector and their firm's activities. So the lines represent classes of economic activities, So are you involved in brewery, food, personal products, for example? And then the columns represent the impact categories, themselves grouped by nature-related issues. So in the conservation standards sense, those would be somewhat of a grouping of targets and threats. So in this assessment, companies are expected to rate the impact on nature of those different activities between very low, low, medium, high, very high. And then to do this exercise, both for their company's operations, which is the circle in the middle, and then for upstream and downstream operations. So what happens, where do they get their resources, and what happens once their products leave their companies? So the tool that typically companies will use to develop this or conduct this assessment is the Encore tool, which is developed by the Natural Capital Finance Alliance. So we'll have a quick look at this tool, but before we'll watch another video that explains what the Encore
1,000
tool
parts
is
or
about.
just one?
Unfortunately,
CNC machining or 3D printing?
Managing risks and uncovering opportunities
still
is your
hear the sound,
business.
right?
It's the difference between being in the black and sliding into the red. But how can you manage risks when you don't know their characteristics or how your business depends on them? Risks, like those presented by the increasing pressure on nature. Natural capital, made up of assets such as water, forests, and clean air, provides ecosystem services that underpin our entire economy. And the environmental change that is now happening, like climate change and biodiversity loss, is degrading these ecosystems faster than ever before, creating risks to businesses and your portfolio. Encore changes this. It helps you to assess your exposure to natural capital risks, covering all sectors around the globe, and even helps you see where environmental change translates into risks to your portfolio. For the first time, you can understand how pollination collapse might impact your agricultural investments or see how droughts could impact your mining portfolio. Understanding your dependencies on natural capital can help strengthen your risk management process and lets you better analyze investments, loans, and insurance. See the risks for yourself. Try Encore today at encore.naturalcapital.finance.
So let's have a look at what the Encore tool looks like. So you first you select the sector of your company. So for our example, we're going to use consumer staples. And then you identify what the sub-industry is. So here we're going to use staples, and we click on explore. Then you can enter the sub-industry. So we're just going to look at food distribution, so soft drinks, and then processed food and drink production as the sub-process. So this would be for a company that is involved in the production of soft drinks or water bottles, for example. And then you can have a look at the dependencies. So which ecosystem services is your company relying on in order to produce their products? So you can see that you're highly dependent on groundwater and surface water. And then if you click, it provides an assessment of how much exactly are you relying on this ecosystem service. And then in terms of impact, you can also see that you are having a very high impact, which is the term materiality. On water use, you can have a look and see that, this data is provided for the sector as a whole. So it's not for a given company, it's just as a whole, the sector is having high impact on water use and GHG emissions. So once you have this knowledge of the kind of dependencies and impacts that your sector has, then following the SBTN process, you are expected to do a more of a fine-tuned analysis and see, tweak the analysis for the sector and apply it to your own organization. So the SBTN is currently developing tools in Excel to support this kind of fine-tuning process. And here we're suggesting that Miradi's pressure assessment function could also be helpful for materiality assessment. So it allows to rank the pressures that various economic activities of an organization are having on ecosystems or species based on their scope, severity, and irreversibility. It then allows to generate a pressure assessment matrix, which is very similar to the materiality matrix of the SBTNs or the ANCOR. And it allows to show which activities generate the greatest pressure on ecosystems and species, as well as a summary of pressures across activities or across ecosystems and species. So although Miradi is not specifically designed to support this materiality assessment exercise for corporations, it could help, and given that the process and functions are quite similar, so we're currently exploring whether that would work or not. It could also be helped to document upstream direct operation and downstream pressures, as well as dependencies. So I'll just show you quickly how this could be done in Miradi. So we have a mock-up project here. So yes, you could use threats to indicate pressures or economic activities that are having an impact on nature. It could be separated between upstream pressures, which are generated by suppliers, direct operations, which are generated by your own company. In this case, this hypothetical company of bottling water, and then downstream pressures, which are generated by your distributors. And then you can link your pressures to the different realms or ecosystems and species that you're having an impact on. And then you can use Miradi's threat analysis to do somewhat of a materiality assessment and indicate, for example, your GHG emissions through water bottling. You can rate the impact on climate, or the construction of your water bottling plant. What kind of impact are they having on wetlands? And then you can rate scope, severity, irreversibility, and have a roll-up of this impact. Okay, so the conservation standards community, if there's we decide that there's enough of a common ground between our two methods and our two frameworks, the conservation standards could provide the SBTN with a pool of hundreds of people located around the world working for a variety of organizations, and they could be helpful in promoting the SBTN as a credible method and provide a pool of trained and experienced coaches, potentially working for companies or with companies in setting science-based targets for nature. All right, moving on. So now we'll quickly look at collaboration opportunities between the science-based target and the CMP. So as Sarah mentioned, there's, or as you saw in Sarah's slides, there's a number of organizations that are members of the SBTN and that are also members of the Conservation Measures Partnership. So right now, I'd like us to do a little activity where I'd like you to indicate what kind of opportunities you see for the SBTN and CMP to work together. I can just get to the link. All right. Right, so I'm posting the link to the survey in the chat. And I will activate the survey. Okay, so you can type in your answers, and then once answers appear, people can vote up and down the answers. So that's what you're gonna see. So if you like someone's answer, you can vote it up, and then it's gonna appear at the top of the list. So what would potentially be the main benefits of an increased collaboration between the Science-Based Target Network and CMP? Okay, so we'll leave a couple of minutes for people to answer.
Charles, can we fill in more than one?
Yeah,
Or
for
just,
sure.
oh, okay.
Yeah, as many as you want. Yeah, and take some time to review the other answers also, so that we can get a sense of you know, which potential benefits seem of more importance to all of you. So we'll leave a couple more seconds. Right, so overall, there's seems like the main benefit would be to expand the network. I assume that's CMP's network, and increase our collaboration with the private sector. More people involved globally in working on these issues is an organized and scientifically sound way. Bringing in private sector in using the conservation standards. Things are moving. Providing alignment between NGOs, government, corporate targets, measurement, and impact as they relate to conservation, and greater credibility to the conservation standard. Okay. Right. So if you have more answers, please type them now, because I'm going to close this, and then we're going to switch to potential barriers. Right. So if you stay in the same link, the survey should switch to challenges. So we did talk about the differences between the methods and the differences between the target audience. So what kind of challenges would there be if the SBTN and CMP work more closely together? Okay, again, we'll just leave a couple of minutes. Well, it seems like there's less challenges than there are benefits, which is a good thing. All right, so it seems like there's something that's emerging here with changing the focus of the conservation standards away from conservation practitioners that work for NGOs and governments and towards supporting private businesses, which could lead to making the standard too generic in order to make them more applicable to other audiences. Conservation standards being linked to greenwashing. It would be hard to have a clear understanding of how the two methods aligned and finding the time for training. All right, so I'll leave that open while we continue. And I just wanted to show you. So yes, thank you. That's going to be really useful to have an idea of potential challenges and opportunities that you see. So next step for me is going to be to build that in a theory of change that I started building on what it could mean to have an increased collaboration between CMP and SBTN. So I'll try to make this a bit bigger. Can you see? Is this big enough or? Yes, so I took a bunch, some results from the CMP strategic plan, trying to identify what would be the benefits for the CMP membership, what would be the benefits for conservation practice with more organizations setting or committing to science-based targets or to adaptive management, loss of nature and climate change working or being tackled together, more organizations being aware of the SBTN and the CMP could lead to increase requirements from funders that we, organizations and companies, adopt good practices. CMP supporting good conservation practices at scale, so we could be developing training and guidelines together, and also working on sharing costs for systems, so Miradi being one of them. And then once practitioners implement good evidence-based conservation, there could be more pressure for public and private disclosure methods and actors to measure conservation effectiveness and to generate evidence that certain actions are having an impact. And then together, we could be more effective at demonstrating the effectiveness of setting science-based targets and doing adaptive management, delivering results and impact. So that's just a draft for now. And again, I'll be taking your suggestions and your input to flesh this out. So do we have any questions?
You can either type them in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand with the button, I can, or turn your video on, I can see you. Any questions for Charles?
Otherwise, Sarah, we can switch to the closing remarks.
Sure. Yeah, if you come up with any questions after we end, I'll be sending a follow-up email to everyone, so you can reply to me there. But Charles, go ahead and say if there's anything else you'd like to add, or Sarah, either of you.
Sarah, do you want to start? I need to find my notes.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for coming and hearing us today. And I think Sarah already shared our email in the chat. And if you have any questions that you think about later that were unclear today, or that you just want to learn more about, please feel free to reach out to us at the corporate engagement email. You can also reach out to Charles. He's very in the know now about SBTN. I also, Charles, I don't know if we wanted to share on the SBTN structure, if it's helpful. I may just share. Yeah, I might share a quick slide or two on how the SBTN is structured. I find that it's useful for understanding our process and governance structure. So this is a high level overview of our structure. And at the top, we have our network council that makes final decisions on strategy and governance issues. And then underneath it, we have our core SBTN team that we call the network hub. And I will give a breakdown of who's in each of that on the next slide. But it's important to note here that we're divided into a technical portion and then more of an operational arm. Under the technical work, we are working to develop guidance, tools, and methods around SBTs for nature. And then the methods specifically are being overseen by our network hub, but are being developed by technical experts in what we call issue hubs. So there are 4 issue hubs that we're overseeing: the Biodiversity Hub, Land Hub, Freshwater Hub, and Oceans Hub. And then SBTi acts as our climate hub. So we're working in partnership with them. And then on the operational side, we focus on finance sector engagement, general marketing and comms for SBTN, and then stakeholder engagement, which is something that I'm primarily focused on. So on the next slide, we can see just who is in charge of each of these key topics. So this is, I won't go into who's in each of our issue hubs, but if you have any questions that I can answer today, for example, on the certification questions, I will be passing it along to people under our technical team. And yes, so this is just, we'll send these slides out afterwards, but this is just to get a better understanding of who's who in our organization. And then on the next slide, I'll close with the minimum requirements. Oops, actually, maybe it's a couple slides ahead. One more. There it is. Okay, minimum requirements to participate in the corporate engagement program. So you or companies or consultants can sign up on the SBTN website, and then we will help you through the rest of the registration process. Companies are not committing to set science-based target, like a science-based target for nature by joining this program. The key goal of this program right now is to develop and test our methods, tools, and guidance over the next year. And we really value the input and feedback from our program members in this technical development process. So for example, we just wrapped up an internal consultation on some updates and supplemental guidance on steps 1 and 2. And then those supplements will be coming out, be published publicly in June with the input from all of our members as well as our partner network. So that is our process right now, and this is a key way to get engaged. And I think that's all I have. So Charles, if you had anything to add as well.
Great, thank you. And yes, if we can just go back to the vision for our project, was that the SBTN and CMP build off and align with each other so that we send a single unified message to NGOs, government agencies, funders, and private businesses. So as was pointed out in your feedback related to the challenges, it remains to be seen whether our similarities between the methods are enough for us to kind of work together, or if although there's a lot of similarities, given that we are primarily working with different audiences, so CMP working with NGOs and governments, and SBTN working primarily with an audience of corporations, does that prevent us from working together, or do we have enough in common so that we could collaborate? So we'll keep on thinking about this, and if you are interested in contributing, you can get in touch with me, and I'll forward all of your questions to Sarah. Just kidding. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all very much. As I mentioned, it has been recorded, so I'll send around a follow-up email with the recording link for you to share with anyone who may have missed it. It also will be on our YouTube channel. So thank you very much for joining, and we hope to see you again for our next webinar in 2 weeks. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Charles.
Everyone.
Thank you.